Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel THICC. Before we get into it, all I ask is that if you enjoyed the video, drop a like and consider subscribing. Alright, now that that's out of the way, let's get into it. Today our deck tech is on Mishra, Tamer of Fawa. This deck's going to be insane. We're going to cast massive creatures, wheel a lot of creatures into our graveyard, bring them back with our commander, sacrifice them to some fling effects to just point it at our opponent's face, and then we'll have a lot of effects that when they enter the battlefield or leave the battlefield, they'll deal damage equal to their power to our opponents. This deck can get out of hand really quickly, and I'm excited to jump into it. First off, guys, let's look at those giant artifact creatures we're going to be casting. We have Phyrexian Tritoform. This one's amazing because whenever we sacrifice him, we're just going to get 3/3/3 golems. So it's basically like we did not lose power on the board. Second, we got Triplicate Titan, the same thing. As soon as this guy dies, we're going to get 3 tokens that are 3/3s. Obviously, we have Ancient Stone Idol because when this guy dies, we're going to get a 6/12, so that's pretty useful. Next up, we have a classic Worm Coil Engine. The lifelink is going to come in handy because there's a lot of ways to pay life in this deck, and also the Death Touch is just icing on the cake. Next, we have Scuttling Doom Engine. This one's really good because whenever it dies, we're going to deal 6 damage to an opponent, regardless of what we do when he's on the battlefield. Next up, we just have a massive Metalworker Colossus. That's a 10/10. We just want him to enter the battlefield. Maybe we have a Warstorm Surge or Terror of the Peaks on the field. He'll deal 10 damage that way. Get in for some combat and then sacrifice him. And hopefully when he dies, he's going to deal another 10 damage. Pretty crazy. Phyrexian Soulgorger. Again, we don't care that we have to sacrifice a creature on upkeep because this guy's not going to be on the battlefield for very long. So we'll just take that 8/8. Traxos Scourge of Krug. This guy is really cheap, and this is one of the ones we'll probably be able to just hardcast. Combustible Gearhulk. Good luck if you want to take the risk and take the damage from the top 3 cards. You should just let anybody draw. Whenever you see this deck, you see all the artifacts, just let them draw. You're basically just flirting with death if you don't at that point. Next up, we have Noxious Gearhulk. Again, this one's going to be pretty good for the life gain, and we're going to take someone out with it. Steel Hellkite, this one's pretty good. We're probably going to want to cast this guy. He can get rid of a whole board of tokens by paying 0 for X and just get rid of whatever we need to. Bosch Iron Golem, this guy's a key piece. We're going to want to cast him. It's 8 mana, but we're going to get there. This one, whenever we bring our cards back from the graveyard, we'll pay that 4 mana and we'll just, fling them at someone's face. It's going to be really fun and we're going to do a lot of damage doing it. Phyrexian Fleshgorger. This one's really cool because it has lifelink, and also they're going to have to pay life equal to Phyrexian Fleshgorger's power to get rid of him because that ward ability is pretty crazy. I will say, though, this guy's price is pretty crazy for what he does, so if that doesn't drop down, he could be an easy cut. Skitterbeam Battalion. This card's pretty crazy because he's going to enter the battlefield as a 4/4, and then he's going to bring in 2 copies with him. So that's going to be a total of 12 power. Pretty crazy. Cityscape Leveler. This guy's awesome. He's going to get rid of anything we don't want onto the battlefield. Su-Chi Cave Guard. This guy's going to be good because whenever he dies, we're just going to get 8 mana. And we don't lose that mana as phases pass. So that's going to be really good. Alright, let's step back and look at some of the key pieces of the deck. We have Altar of Dementia. This one's going to be crazy. We're going to sacrifice those giant artifact creatures and then going to get more into our graveyard. Ghoul Caller Gisa. This is going to turn our giant artifact creatures into a massive board state. Sack an 8/8 and you'll just end up with 8 2/2 zombies. That's going to be a total of 16 power out of nowhere. That's pretty insane. Imhotep the Stormlord. Every time one of our artifact cards leaves our graveyard, we're going to create 2 Black Necron Warrior artifact creature tokens. That's going to be insane over the course of a game. Additionally, we can give one of our giant artifact creatures plus 2/2 and Menace until end of turn. Scrap Welder is just going to allow us to sacrifice one of our giant artifacts for a slightly smaller giant artifact creature. So he's going to be really useful in the deck. Buried Alive is insane in this deck because it's going to get whatever we need into our graveyard. And then our commander's just going to be able to bring it out. So it's really useful. Armix Filigree Thrasher. This one, it attacks and you're just going to be able to kill something. So pretty useful in the deck, and he's really hard to get rid of because we're just going to bring him back. Canoptic Scarab Swarm. This one's really cool, right? Because we're going to be using our graveyard, and since we're a little greedy, we don't want anybody else doing that. So we're going to get rid of everybody else's graveyard and create a pretty big board doing it. Lastly, we have Canoptic Tomb Sentinel. This one's really good because as long as it comes out of the battle or out of your graveyard to the battlefield, it's going to get rid of any non-land permanents. So that's going to be pretty useful. Alright guys, we're running a lot of useful creatures that we don't necessarily want to exile to bring them from our graveyard, so we are running a pretty good recursion package with Chainer Nightmare Adept. This is going to allow us to discard a giant artifact card and play one of our utility creatures from the graveyard, such as Canoptic Tomb Sentinel, right? Felden of the Third Path, not only can we use him to recur one of those giant artifact creatures every single turn, but he can also get one of those utility creatures. Nim Deathmantle. This card is not that bad, okay, because it's 4 mana to activate it, yes, but when you attach this to an 8/8, 4 mana to keep an 8/8 on the battlefield is really good, especially when we're talking about maybe a Skitterbeam Battalion. Just getting that enter the battlefield effect over and over again is going to be insane in this deck. Same, we got Resurrection Orb. This is also going to give the creatures lifelink. So that's really useful because, again, we do want to pad our life a little bit because there's ways to pay life later on in the deck. Finally, we have Phyrexian Delver. This guy's insane because we will have to pay some life, but we're probably not paying life to bring one of those 8/8s out. We're probably paying life to bring one of the utility creatures out just to get that enter the battlefield effect. Whip of Erebos, we're really not going to use that second ability because it is 1 more mana than our commander, but it is useful as a secondary, you know, our commander's dead, we don't want to recast him, so just cast this. It also gives all of our creatures lifelink, which they are massive, so that's pretty insane. Scarecrow, this one's really good because for 4 mana, you can just recur one of the artifact creatures from your graveyard. Pretty simple and pretty effective. Scrap Trawler, leave this guy on the battlefield, and every time one of those giant 8/8s dies, we're going to be able to bring something of lesser mana to the battlefield, right? So you can just work this down. You can get an 8 mana cost into a 7 mana cost into a 6 mana cost, and while you're doing that, you're creating a ton of value because you're sacrificing them for value, and you're dealing damage to them because hopefully we have Terror of the Peaks on the battlefield or Warstorm Surge, right? Speaking of that, let's transition into our next category, big damage. Terror of the Peaks, obviously, right? Big giant artifact creatures are going to be entering the battlefield, and we want to do damage when that happens, so this guy's perfect. Secondly, Warstorm Surge. This one's perfect because it's exactly the same as Terror of the Peaks. Kazul's Fury. Not only is this a land, it can act as a fling effect if we need it. Fling, obviously. Soul's Fire, same thing. Pyrrhic Blast, this one's really good because it replaces itself, right? So it's basically like you do it, you get your damage, and then you get a card for it. Flare of the Hatebound. This one's pretty good because anytime we bring one of those giant artifacts from our graveyard, they're going to instantly deal damage equal to their power. Stalking Vengeance. Yes, it's expensive, but whenever our creature dies, it's going to deal damage equal to its power to target player. That's exactly what this deck is trying to do, so we threw them in the deck. Alright, next up, I'm going over these huge creatures we're going to have to cast somehow. I mean, we're going to get a lot of them into our graveyard through wheel effects, but we are going to need to cast some of them. So let's go over how we can do that. We have Illuminor Saras. Sacrifice another creature at an amount of black mana equal to the sacrificed creature's mana value. So that's going to be pretty good. As soon as we bring in one of those giant 8/8s that cost 8 mana, we'll sacrifice it, and then we'll be able to cast one from our hand. Neheb the Eternal. This guy has the potential to create an insane amount of damage. Imagine this. Okay, we bring in an 8/8 from our graveyard. We get the ETB off of Terror of the Peaks, we deal combat damage, and then we fling him at their face. That's 24 mana that this guy is going to create. Next up, we have the Reaver Cleaver. This one's equally insane because it's going to create a massive amount of treasure tokens. Solemn Simulacrum, this guy's probably no surprise. He's going to be abused in this deck. We are not casting him once, we are casting him multiple times. Arcane Signet, just really efficient. Same with Rakdos Signet. And finally, we have Soul Ring. Lastly, I'm going to leave you with Neheb Dreadhorde Champion. Not only can this discard a lot of creatures to our graveyard, but it can also create a decent amount of mana. And Rakdos Lord of Riots. Remember, we're going to be dealing damage by our creatures entering the battlefield. And now whenever they do that, it's going to lower the casting cost of those giant creatures in our hand. Thran Dynamo is just going to create a lot of damage. Ashnod's Altar is going to be a pretty good sack outlet, and it can go infinite. Mishra's Excavation Prodigy. This one's really good because it's going to get the cards that we want into our graveyard and replace it. It's also going to net us some mana whenever we do that. Alright guys, let's get into that card advantage. We have Dark Deal. This one's really efficient because it's going to fill our hand and fill our graveyard. Next up, we have Wheel of Misfortune. This one sounds really complicated, but it's not. Whoever bids the most takes that amount of damage, and whoever bids the least does not wheel. So there you go. Reforge the Soul. This one's just a simple wheel, and it's got Miracle attached to it, which is pretty useful. Ruin Grinder. This one's a giant artifact that can go ahead and discard our hand and draw us 7 cards. Grevin Praetor Captain. This one's pretty crazy, and this is when the life starts to get a little sketchy, right? But Disciple of Bolas is going to come in there and pad our life a little bit and draw us a lot of cards. Next, we have Mask of Grizzlebrand. Not only does this give one of our creatures flying and lifelink, but we can go ahead and sacrifice that creature and then draw cards equal to its power. Next, we have Garner Bloodfist of Kelt. We're going to be attacking a lot, and notably, we're going to be sacrificing a lot of those creatures when we attack, so we're just going to be drawing cards when we do that. I'll just talk about the infinite combo very briefly. We have Ashnod's Altar, Imhotep the Stormlord, and Nim Deathmantle. Attach this to any artifact creature, and go ahead and loop them through your graveyard, and you're going to go infinite. Additionally, Su Chi Cave Guard can also go infinite with Nim Deathmantle, right? As long as you have a sack outlet, you're going to get 8 mana whenever it dies. That's enough to pay for Nim Deathmantle. And you can go ahead and loop this guy. Have Warstorm Surge on the battlefield, and everyone's dead. Alright guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. I think you'll notice a few similarities between my Animar deck and this one, but a lot of people wanted to see Mishra Mark Fawa with big freaking artifacts. So that's exactly what I gave you guys. Please like, comment, and subscribe. And if you want to add green and blue to this deck, go ahead and check out my Animar deck. Hello everybody, and welcome back to my channel, THICC. Before we get into it, all I ask is that if you enjoyed the video, drop a like and consider subscribing. Alright, now that that's out of the way, let's get into it. Today, our deck is on Mishra, Tamer of Mock Fawa. This deck's going to be insane. We're going to cast massive creatures, wheel a lot of creatures into our graveyard, bring them back with our commander, sacrifice them to some fling effects to just point it at our opponent's face, and then we'll have a lot of effects that when they enter the battlefield or leave the battlefield, they'll deal damage equal to their power to our opponents. This deck can get out of hand really quickly, and I'm excited to jump into it. First off, guys, let's look at those giant artifact creatures we're going to be casting. We have Phyrexian Tritiform. This one's amazing.